e sigam em coração e em pensamento, assim como a oração não tem limite. So good evening everyone, welcome to Solidarity. As usual, we're going to start with a prayer before we move on to our talk tonight that's going to be about the laws of cause and effect. Just put this one here to make sure people can listen to me. Yeah, the microphone, yeah. So, I'll just leave it here. So, dear spiritual benefactors, protectors of this house, it's with gratitude in our hearts that we start our works tonight, humbly asking for your presence with us, your protection, and your guidance to all the works that will be carried out in this house of prayer tonight. We ask you that you may bless our dear Marina that will talk to us tonight. We also humbly ask you that you may bless all of those that are coming to this talk and all of those that are here from this side and the other side of life. May we open our hearts, open our minds to learn what Spiritism can teach us, to learn with each other, to learn through our experiences. We thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight, for the opportunity to serve, and for the opportunity to learn about Spiritism and the teachings of our Master Jesus. And with his permission, we open our meeting tonight. So be it. So good evening, everyone. So tonight we have Marina from San Diego, originally from Brazil, but she lives in San Diego now. Marina will be talking to us about the laws of cause and effect. And I'm just gonna read a very brief introduction before I pass it on to Marina. So Marina was born in a Spirited family in São Paulo, Brazil. She studied Spiritism teachings from a very young age, although she's still very young, so it's not that long ago, isn't it?
I wish.
Marina has given lectures in Netherlands, the UK, Ireland, Finland, and Brazil. She lived in Amsterdam, where she volunteered for the Congress of Medicine and Spirituality and Ambassadors of Light Campaign. She now lives in San Diego, where she is currently a member of the Allan Kardec Spiritist Society. As mentioned, she will be talking to us tonight about the laws of cause and effect. This talk will be in English, but Marina, as Brazilian, she speaks Portuguese, so after the talk, she'll be also available for any questions we might have. So, Marina, the floor is yours. Welcome. Yes, so I've got one for you.
Oh,
there you go.
perfect.
Just
Let's
put
see.
it anywhere.
Like this?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry. Oh, yeah. If you
that's
take this too, yeah.
okay.
You don't need that, isn't it?
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Mariana, for inviting me, and thank you all for having me. This is not a formal conversation. We're just going to have a chat, so feel free to ask questions. And I have some Portuguese written in the slides as well. Is that okay? So, cause and effect. This is something that we talk often, right? What comes to mind when we think of the laws of cause and effect? Sometimes we say, I have bad karma, everything goes wrong in my life, I have good karma with parking. Don't we say some things like that? Right? But what does this really mean? So that word, by the way, we don't have that word in Spiritism, right? But I added it here because it's something that we talk about often. It is, it means, basically means, is a Sanskrit word that means come back. What goes comes back. And you see here Newton saying that every action has a reaction. But what it does, there's a cosmic law of attribution. That's basically what cause and effect means, right? But is it the same thing as action and reaction? Right?
Yeah.
It is in a way, but not all the way. And the reason why I wanted to add it here is because if we throw a ball on the wall, what happens? It comes back. What if I do that 10 times?
It bounces back
10
10 times.
times. And sometimes we confuse that with the laws of cause and effect. Action and reaction is a mechanical, automated law. You do something, something happens. Cause and effect is a divine, dynamic, universal law. It has a retribution aspect to it, but is not as mechanical and as mathematical as we think. And the reflection that I want to bring today is that sometimes, even in the spiritist world, we hear, oh, this person broke his leg is because past time he's probably broke somebody's leg. I'm like, oh, it's not like that. We think that way. We think in a mechanical way, but God is way beyond that. So maybe it's also important to talk about what cause and effect is not, because we tend to associate that with punishment. We tend to associate that with revenge. We are in a movie theater and we're watching a movie and there's the good guy and there's the bad guy, and then the villain dies and everybody says, well done, you know, you've got something bad. That is how we think God operates. But that's not the divine law. So I wanted to introduce that because it's something we use commonly, but is very easy to misinterpret. And I wanted to bring here some pieces of the gospel, of the Spirit's book, Heaven and Hell, and Action and Reaction by Andrea Luiz. And there's a book called Thought and Life by Emmanuel as well, to see what can we make out of that. So maybe we can reflect together today about these pieces. Yeah? But please interrupt me if you have questions or points. I think this is for us to learn together. So let's think through this. So the first thing is the purpose of the law is to educate and to teach, not to punish. Do we hear that sometimes? They say, oh, I must have done terrible things in my past life because now I have my kids out of control and I have a boss that does this to me and all of that. We talk like that, right? We think in punishment sentences, but it's just an education part. So let's see how that works. So there is a part here called the divine justice, right? Each soul creates his own conscience, the credits and debits that will bring joy and pain, happiness and hurdles. So this is from Action and Reaction of Andrea Luiz. And he talks about life has an accounting system to express the mechanisms of indisputable justice, right? Can we relate to that? We do some good things and we do some bad things. And some good things generate good things and the bad things generate bad things, right? We're going to get more into the detail of that. I'm just introducing some concepts for now. And if we think as humanity on an evolutionary state, let's think back in the times of Moses. We were like young children. So what do you do with young children? You threaten them and say, if you push your brother, I don't give you dessert. If you do this, I'll take your toy away. It's more of and that's the words of the Old Testament, right? It's eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Is an angry, punishing God. Jesus changed that. He showed a loving father. He treated us more like teenagers. And talking about, a forgiving, love, mercy, but still, there were words of accountability, right? Judge not unless you will be judged. By your words you're justified, and by your words you are condemned. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap, right? There's that part about you're responsible for what you create, which is different than anybody punishing us. It is about what we make out of our lives is our responsibility. Is that okay? So, interesting. The moral law. So in the Spirit's book, there, the fourth part, we have the moral laws. Where is the cause and effect written in those moral laws? The funny thing is, it's not a moral law. This is a very interesting reflection that I had with my brother. We have the law of worship, the law of labor, the law of reproduction, the law of preservation, the law of destruction, the law of society, right? So we talk about adoring God, law of work, reproduction, preservation, destruction, society, the law of progress. We have the responsibility for our own personal development, right? The law of equality, law of freedom, and the law of justice, love, and charity. I highlighted here because my brother and I went back and forth with this discussion to say, where would the law of cause and effect be here? First of all, it's not a law because it's a mechanism. It's not a law. Second, if we only had to progress, but it's a compulsory state, you have to do this, like there's some people that believe in fatality. Everything was written. If I go through a red light, it was written by God. So I don't have any choice. If I don't have any choice, there's no cause and effect, right? So if it was just progress without freedom, there's no cause and effect. But if there was just freedom without any consequence to progress, there's no cause and effect either. But because we have the free will and we have to progress, we have the mechanism of cause and effect. That's what we're going to study today. That is our reflection, is how does that work? So there are mechanisms to correct our course. It's like when you're driving your car and you're getting out of the lane, the car beeps. It tells you, go back to your lane. There are mechanisms that says, you can do whatever you want, but we're going to try to correct you. We're going to try to take you back to course. And I marked here the law of justice, love, and charity because we cannot fully comprehend the laws of love, we struggle in understanding cause and effect, and we always feel punished and condemned. So it's a bit of a challenge yet for us, but we'll get there. So today I'm going to talk about a few pieces that are related to the law of progress and the law of freedom and how they come together. And then we can have a dialogue on that. So let's start with our evolution, right? We are here in our evolution journey. How does that work? What is the purpose of incarnation? When I say SB, it means the Spirit's book, okay? And in Portuguese, I put LE, Livro dos Espíritos. So the questions 115 and 132 talk a little bit about that. And they say, well, all created simple and ignorant. And we are here with a mission to enlighten ourselves and slowly developed towards perfection. And the purpose of our incarnation is to lead us to perfection. So there are two roles, actually. One is we're here to improve ourselves. And the beautiful thing is we're all going to get there. Everybody. We can take the time we want. We can just fight with life. We can rebel against it. But we'll all get there. But there's a second part here that's very beautiful. Each one of us play a very important role in this whole piece of life. So it's like it's a team sport. We all have our offer here to improve ourselves, but we also have the responsibility to help one another. So it's a cooperative system. You see, it says everything in nature is united, right? And then it says, if God gave preferences to how one thing or another happened, it wouldn't be just. So here, it gives us the merit of choice. And that's where we engage with the laws of cause and effect. Is that okay? I'm making sense so far? If not, you can say something. So I'll leave here for a second. Same slide in Portuguese. I can give them to you later, but you can see a little bit the questions of the Spirit's book where it talks about the purpose of incarnation and why we're here, right? So yeah, everybody starts in the same place. We're all going to get to perfection, and we're here. Every life is like a class. We take multiple assignments, and there's somebody in there working with us to say, no, you should take that class, or you should take that class again. And as we do that, we also cooperate with one another, right? So if God is good, why does evil exist? Wait a minute, that's fine. I understand that we're here to improve ourselves. I understand that we're here to get better. Well, why does evil exist then, right? It's a good question. So we want to look into that. So I found this in the Gospel According to Spiritism, chapter 3. In my father's house, there are many mentions. There are two pieces here by St. Augustine that says, in your world, evil is necessary to experience goodness. Night, to admire light. Sickness, to be able to appreciate health. In those other worlds, there's no need for this contrast. Isn't that something, when we get really sick, we're like, oh, I feel like that. I'm like, oh, why don't I appreciate more when I'm not feeling like that, you know? So we need that contrast, right? How do we know good? Because we know bad. So we are still in a place, and this chapter explains very well, we know we're not in a very evolved world. This is kind of a medium, you know, kind of lower, less developed world. In here, we need that. We need to deal with the contrast. We need live in this world of duality, right? And in other worlds, that doesn't happen anymore, right? Does anybody want to read 15? So you're not hearing so much my voice.
I can read it.
Yeah.
So, 15. Consequently, the earth offers an example of a word of atonement, and although the variety is infinite, they all have one thing in common. They all serve as places of exile for those spirits who rebel against the law of God. This means that these spirits have at one and the same time to fight against the perversity of man and the inclemency of nature, which is doubly arduous, but which will develop the qualities of heart and intelligence simultaneously. God, then, in all his goodness, allows punishment to become something which will benefit the spirit.
Thank you. Isn't that beautiful, the words of St. Augustine? And I'll put here a little bit as we talk about that. I'll just leave here for a second in Portuguese as well. So he says that it's through experiencing, when we deal with hardships is when we feel, and you notice that a lot of times when we had the big disasters, when September 11th happens and things like that, people come together, people help each other. So that contrast calls for different things in us, and is in that experience that we evolve. But it says here that God is so good that he uses those mechanisms to help us with our evolution. So God doesn't create evil, but permits it and uses it for our improvement. Are we okay with that? Kind of, I think these are one reflection after the other that's saying, why does that happen, right? So let's talk about pain. Is it, you know, we usually talk about it as punishment. Is it a divine punishment? And back to the Spirit's book, it talks about this reciprocity. Reciprocity is pretty much here talked about as the law of cause and effect. And very simple, and I love the way Kardec, you know, lays out the Spirit's book because it's very logical, right? And he says, when you eat too much, it harms you. And I experience that often, I'm going to tell you. Well, then, that is God letting you know what is necessary for you, and when exceed that measure, you are punished. So sometimes we know that, right? We wake up in the morning and say, oh, why did I go to bed so late last night? I should have slept more. So we experience, by experiencing the consequences of our actions, we start to say, okay, next time that I have a big meeting, I'm going to go to bed early because I want to be rested. So we start to understanding when we cross some limits, it's not good for us. And we say, okay, we're going to work differently, right? And there's always a voice that says enough, right? And if we listened to that voice, we would be much happier, right? What do spirits gain by following the right path? Because remember, we were talking about two things, the law of progress and our free choice. And here the question is, what about people that just choose for the right path? And the answer is, they reach their goals more quickly. Life is easier when we don't fight life. Right? When we don't fight life, things kind of flow, and it's okay also because we grow up with this, oh, you cannot make a mistake. We should make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes every day of our lifetime because we are in a world of imperfect spirits and we're imperfect. And what happens? It's okay. If you make a mistake, we try to say, you know what? I'm reflecting. And St. Augustine, he has a beautiful piece, question 919, if I'm not mistaken, that he talks about a good man. And he says, look, when he was alive, every night he would reflect on his day. And he said, oh, I was impatient with that person. I could have spent more time doing this. I had to rush through something. And every night he reflected on it. And the next day, he tried to repair whatever he had done the day before. It's just a process. There's a process associated with life. And when we engage in that process, we tend to be happier. Yeah? So that's the natural law. Basically, the natural law is the first law of the moral laws in the Spirit's book. And it says, when we worked well with the laws, divine law, we're happy. When we don't work well, we suffer. It's pretty simple, right? I'll leave here for a second. We just talked about the natural law, and these are the number of the questions of the Spirit's book. And then let's talk about pain, right? So here, the question 1009 is huge, by the way. I put a very small summary here that says the punishment is the stick that leads the soul to turn inwards through its affliction in order to return to the right path. That's a good thing to reflect on. My mother used to say that pain is a bell that rings to invite us to think differently. Right? And I put here the picture of a sheep, because that's what the pastor does. He tries to say, hey, come over here. And that's what life is saying. It's like, I think it's time for you to go back a little bit. No, go back a little bit. And we act like children, right? We get upset and we have our temper tantrum, like we don't like it. That was not the way it's supposed to work. But is life telling us, maybe that's not the right thing for you? Why don't you think about something else, right? What happens is the more we rebel against the message, the more pain we get, right? The more painful it becomes. So that's only those mechanisms. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the story of Nicodemus in the Livro Boa Nova, the Good News book, right? It shows the dialogue. That is a beautiful story. I recommend if you have a chance, read it. So Humberto de Campos wrote a few stories, right, that he could see from the times of Jesus. He describes this university where they can actually see the scenes. And of course, he was a reporter, so a journalist, and one of the stories is he describes the scene where Nicodemus asks Jesus about the laws of cause and effect. Because Nicodemus was, of course, he was a man of the law, and he wants to know what the law was. And he said, I understand everything about the law here, and and Jesus tells him, nobody will go to the Father without being born and reborn. And he gets very confused. He says, how can a grown man go back into his mother's womb? And how does that work? And he gets very confused by that. And Jesus said, if you don't even understand what I'm talking about, the laws of the earth, how can you understand the laws of God, right? So he gets very confused. That later got interpreted as baptism, and all of those things. And then Philip and Andrew were listening to that conversation, and they come to him and they say, Master, what is this all about? And Jesus said, isn't it written that anybody who commits an injustice needs to suffer? So there's a process, and he talks about the laws of reincarnation. And they get very sad. They said, Master, that's a very sad law, because today there's a murder, tomorrow there's a murder, and then there's a murder, there's a murder. So it never ends. Perpetuate pain. But remember the last law that we talked about? Jesus said, like Nicodemus, you're thinking about the law but not feeling it. For God, there's no murder and victim. There are two brothers walking towards the Father. And wherever there's love, there's no need for suffering. So we don't understand that yet. We're like Andrew and Philip, like, oh, well, why does that work? So that is the story that when I read that, I was like, now I get the laws of cause and effect. Now I get it. It's just to force us to the right path. And once there's love, forgiveness, everything can be better, right? In Portuguese. And then it's very interesting in the book Action and Reaction, they explain, André Luiz explains the forms of pain, because is every kind of pain beneficial to our development? If I'm just angry at life and I'm just angry at everybody and I am upset at everyone, is this a good pain? No, right? I'm not developing, I'm not learning, and I'm in pain. So that's bad pain. So he's something that he calls the evolution pain. Evolution pain is like when we exercise and then, the next morning we feel a little bit like our muscles, but we feel good because it's like, oh, I'm doing something good, right? That is the evolution pain. Is the evolution that you have the pain, but we're learning something. We're like, I got this. Next time I'm going to do a better job. Is the process. Remorse pain is painful, but it's not good. It's that state of oh my God, what did I do? And, that circle that you feel completely confused. That's not good pain. And there's even another type of pain that he describes, because André Luiz, they go visit somebody, and this man is completely paralyzed in bed in a very critical situation. And he asks his mentor, like, what did he do? What he's being punished for? He said, no, he's not being punished. His man is so evil. And he does so many bad things to himself and to others that he needs to live in this condition just to quiet him a little bit. So he was being protected from himself. That is also not a good pain. It's like, the dog, when you cover his face so he doesn't, injure himself even more. That is the kind of support pain. We don't want to be in that one, right? We don't want to be in that situation. So it's interesting to think that, because sometimes we can think, oh, I'm going through so much pain is because I'm evolving a lot. Well, maybe not, depending on the pain we're going through, right? And then I wanted to get to heaven and hell. I don't know if you study all the books here and how that works and how many of you are familiar with that. Book is, I think, is the fourth book, right, of the Kardec wrote. I think is Spirit's book. It is the Gospel. Then I think it's Genesis, and I think it's Heaven and Hell, right? And then the Medium's book, I think, is the last one. I think we have to check. But this book is very interesting because there are two parts to it, and one is, and I love how Kardec writes, because he says we live and we die, period. Either there's life after death or not, period. So he kind of goes through like his very philosophical and pragmatic approach, and he kind of deals us to say, and is a lighter way to put the afterlife. The second part, he categorizes all the communications that he has, spirits that were in a suffering state, spirits that were suicidal, spirits that were happy, and the spirits talk about what is their experience on the afterlife. The interesting thing is, of all the communication there, nobody talks about, oh, there was a tribunal, there was a jury, there was, condemnation. There was none of that we imagine, right? We imagine there will be a big judge there. They're going to say, you did this and you did that. None of that. What they were experiencing is what happened to their conscience, their regrets, their sorrows. That's what they were talking about. And here he says, he's going to talk about, there are 30 elements that I'll talk about in a second. Item 5, he says, suffering being indissolubly connected with imperfection and enjoyment with excellence, the soul finds its own punishment in itself, wherever it may be. So there's no place, because we imagine there's a place called heaven with a gate and St. Peter's there, and there's a place called hell, and there's a, there's not a physical space. And I love the cover of that book. When I was a kid, that's the one we had at home, because it describes beautifully that picture. Heaven and hell is our state of mind. And we know that when we're having a bad day, you can go whatever you want, that bad day is with you, right? When you're happy and everything is fine, people can be doing all sorts of things around it. It doesn't bother us because we're in a good state of mind, right? It's about what happens internally that we can recreate, right? And I think that picture, that's why I put that one in there, because I know it's not available anymore, but I love how that cover tells so much about the book. And there's something that Kardec writes, it's called the Penal Code of the Life to Come. So I think there's about 30 items in there. I'm not going to write them all, but I do encourage you all to read it. It's very enlightening to, how the way it's explained. And it says a few things, right? We had item number 5 before. Here's item number 1. The soul or spirit suffers in the spiritual life the consequences of the imperfections that could not correct when incarnated. You see the cause and effect. We live the consequence of the other life. It's not because we die, all of a sudden we become saints and holy, right? We continue being who we are, and whatever we have we'll carry with us, right? Second, full happiness is related to perfection. In other words, the complete purification of the spirit. Remember, we just read that in the Spirit's book, it says that there's a natural law, and when we're in perfect harmony with that law, we're happy. When we deviate from the law, we suffer. And this is an imperfect world. We're not in perfect harmony yet. I like that word yet, because one day will be, but we're not yet. So therefore, we're not in that state of perfection. 7 says, every fault is a debt that must be settled. So this is the sense of accountability. Right? I'm responsible for what I do. Number 8, the consequence varies according to the severity of the fault. And that makes sense, right? You can do a small thing, you can do a big thing, different consequences if there's a cause and effect relationship. And the 4th said, the law of progress provides every soul the opportunity to acquire the good that it lacks. And I put that here in a different color because that's the love of love again, to say, look, you can make your mistakes. I let you make your choices, but I'm going to give you as many chances as you need to correct yourself. And I'm a loving Father, and I'm going to be here for you as long as it takes. That is the law of love operating. Right? I give you the tools, I give you the equipment, I give you the assignment, I prepare everything, all the conditions for you to evolve. So let's talk a little bit about the process of reparation, because on item 11, he says regret is not enough. I can't just say, oh, yeah, I'm sorry I did that and move on. There's a process to that, because remember, God is just, so there's a justice associated with that. So he talks about expiation and reparation. So I made a very silly example for us to reflect on that, right? So there's a little boy, he's playing with his new football, and he kicks the ball on the vase of his grandmother, and she gets very sad, right? He doesn't know what happens. He doesn't think much of it, right? His mom gets upset at him. He said, go to your room. You shouldn't have done that. But he doesn't really think much of that. He's like, it's just a vase, As he grows up, as time goes on, he starts to think. And then he learns that vase was the last gift his grandfather gave to his grandmother before he died. And he feels really bad. He's like, well, I hurt my grandmother. I love her. I did something that caused some harm. And I feel bad. Because remember, in the Spiritist book says the law of God is written in our conscience, right? We know when we do something, right? It doesn't feel good, right? It's like, oh, that doesn't feel quite well. The more conscious we become, the worse we feel, right? And then he doesn't feel good about that. And he's like, well, you know, just apologizing doesn't feel right because I hurt her. She misses my grandfather. She doesn't have that vase anymore. That's not okay. So then, what did I do? Okay, sorry about that. So then he has a conversation with his mother that she says, look, if you feel really bad about that, I have an idea. You can work on the weekends, you can cut the grass of the neighbors around, and you can make a little bit of money. When you make enough money, we're gonna go and you buy a new vase and you give to your grandmother. And he loves that idea because then he can do something to repair something he did before. So he works all the weekends that he needs, and then he comes to a point that he can buy a new vase. And then, I don't know why I did that. And I think that, and then there's a happy grandmother here. So you just, I don't know what I did with my animation. But you get the point, right? So this is a very simple example. But if we reflect to that, it's like God acts like that loving mother that says, you know what? No worries. We're going to give you a new life. You're going to forget everything so you don't feel bad. We're going to put all the mechanisms and the tools and the things so you can, you know, repair some things and get closer to me in the process. That's simple as that, right? So how to find happiness? Well, we know that we're not in a perfect world. So we know that absolute happiness doesn't exist. But what they say is there's a relative happiness that we can find right now, right? Can we be fully happy? Say no, because you know, here is a place of trials and atonement, but people can reduce their misfortunes and make their lives as happy as possible while on earth. So it depends on us to see how easy or how hard we want to make life be. And that's a good reflection to have, right? Spirits tell us that, you know, we try to blame the past lives, but a lot of the things that we're suffering now is a consequence of this life, is the choices that we make right now, is not, you know, the past. But the good news is we can make different choices every day, right? How did Chico used to say, nobody can have a new beginning, but everybody can start now and have a new ending. So every day when we get up is a new opportunity. We can make all the choices that we want. And here it says, question 922, is there a common standard of happiness for everyone? It says, to material life is the possession of what is necessary. Regarding the moral life is having a good conscience and faith in the future. Right? It's just that feeling like, hey, I'm doing the best I can, and I'll keep doing what I can. If I make a mistake, I'm going to try to correct it. If I identify something that's not okay in my behavior, I'm going to try to do better next time. Right? Also practicing self-forgiveness, because we can't expect to be perfect, right? We're not. And then Kardec says something nice here. He says, if we go back to the origin of what we call misfortune, we will find that most of them are consequence of original deviation. There's always a point that we'll find there was a decision that we made that caused something, right? And that's why we fall into misfortune. I'll leave here a little bit, and afterwards I can also give you the Portuguese piece if you want. But so I think it's nice to talk about that, because we say, oh, this is a world of trials and stuff. But there's also a possibility to have an okay life and live at peace with ourselves, live at peace with others, live at peace with the life that we have and the things that we cannot change. Is a form of happiness possible, right? Now, I put here the good spirits happiness because one day we're going to get there. So I said, let's talk about that, right? It talks about mutual love being a source of supreme happiness, that happiness is always proportional to the degree of elevation. And can you imagine, right, that a place where you feel no anger, no resentment, no regret, only good feelings, no envy, nothing, just the good feelings. That's the state that the good spirits feel. They don't feel any hatred, jealousy, envy, ambition, or any passions that will make our lives miserable. That's going to be a beautiful day, right? But we can dream about that. So here, right? So now I wanted to, so this is the part that we talked about the law of progress. We talked about the law of, free will. We talked about how they come together. And then I want to introduce a couple of pieces that are things that we can control and have a big factor in how happy we are, right? One is our thoughts. So are you familiar with the book Pensamento e Vida, Thoughts and Life by Emmanuel? That's a very good read, right? And he has a chapter that talks about thoughts. It says we have the ability to assimilate each other's vibrations because what it is that we study, our thoughts are continuously sending and receiving thoughts from each other, right? No one can escape from that. It's not like a radio that you can turn off. You can only choose the radio station, right? We're constantly thinking together with somebody, right? And we know that because you start thinking of something, more ideas of that come along, right? We continuously project and receive thoughts, and therefore we can create ideas that can hurt or stimulate our progress. And the mental reflection lives at the foundation of life, and we are responsible for what we create. So we're also not only creating with our words, we're creating with our thoughts as well. We have the power to create, and we're responsible for that, right? So this is something, because what was the recommendation of Jesus? Pray and be vigilant, right? So we have to, and sometimes some thoughts come and say, oh, I don't want this thought here, with me. And with thoughts, here's the part in Portuguese. It's just a 2-page note in the book, so I think it's worthwhile reading. And then with that, there's another chapter called Sintonia, which is the connection, right? Not only we create with our thoughts, but we connect with other thoughts, right? It's like a current that connects to other ones, right? It's like we have a radio that if you dial in a radio station, we're all dialed to the same, we're all feeding into one another, right? We tune in the emotions and ideas of all people, incarnate and discarnate. And you notice that sometimes, right? Because you say, you're in a meeting with people and you're saying something and somebody says something you're going to say, or say, oh, I was going to say that. But we're exchanging thoughts at that moment. Or you're thinking of a person and they call us, right? We're all thinking of each other all the time, and we are creating that, right? So we are attracting or repelling mental resources all the time, right? So we're always attracting something and creating something. And that's where we have to be very aware of what we think and who we connect with. Because they're that, right? And it's common. You look at the news. What is the most thing that we hear about? Strategy, violence. We only want to talk about the bad. I know that in any given day, there's somebody that's helping people, that's giving money to children, but we want to talk about the bad. But what happens? We create more bad because we talk about the bad. Let's choose differently. Let's choose to talk about the good. Let's choose to pay attention to what is good, because when we pay attention to something, we invite that thing to our lives. And that is the next thing that he talks about, which is judgment. What did Jesus say about judgment? Judge not, lest you will be judged, right? And here, he has a beautiful explanation. When we dwell on the defects and faults of others, the mirror of our mind immediately reflects them. We are attracting, when we pay attention to what is bad, what's bad, I'm inviting bad into my life. I'm creating that space for that bad to come to me, right? And sometimes you notice that, right? That our imagination begins to digest this kind of food. It's like food for imagination, which later is incorporated into the subtle tissue of our souls. As time passes, our soul often begins to express through its vehicle of manifestation. Have you seen that? The people that talk about certain thing, that the very thing happens to them. It's very interesting to look into that, right? And It is a reason that those who criticize the behavior of others generally end up practicing the same actions that they condemn. Because what happens is, if I'm saying, oh, smoking is bad, people shouldn't smoke, oh, look at that person smoke. What I'm creating in my imagination smoking, and one day I'm going to end up smoking because I talk about it, I think about it, I project it, I create. It's going to happen to me, or it's going to happen to somebody next to me because I'm inviting that into my life. Right? We should be paying attention to what is good. There's that story, right, that everybody's talking about, that the dog, and the dog is in decomposition, is smelling bad and all of that. And then Jesus looked and said, oh, he had beautiful teeth. Look at something redeemable in all the bad, right? What can we pay attention to? What can we invite to our lives? And it's hard because we live in a world that there's a lot of stuff happening, right? There's war, there's a lot of things, but what if we start paying attention to what is good? And that's something too that happens, and I noticed that at work, and you probably have the same experience. And then say, oh, I'm not good at that because my wife say I'm always bad at this stuff. Sometimes with judgment, we can label people and say, oh, you always do this, you're always clumsy, you're always that. That's a judgment that the person's not even going to try something else. We should encourage people to be the best versions of themselves. So you don't know that yet, but I believe you can do it. Let's go give it a try. Let's be the ones that instead of putting people down, we bring them up. We all have potentialities of our souls. We all have everything in here that one day can be developed. So why label? Why call names? Sometimes we make jokes and we make fun of people and all of that. They don't even try something else because they were made fun of before. They're afraid of it. Let's think about that. You know, we're all here in development, and it's a team sport. Let's try it, right? So I brought the points about thinking, judgment, and connection, because these are things that we can choose any minute of the day. We can make a choice. Yeah, it's our choice. People are talking about something that's not nice. We cannot reprimand them maybe, but we can walk away. So no, I have to make a phone call. We don't need to be part of that conversation. If it's not a healthy conversation, let's not be involved in it, right? We don't need to be involved in these things. So I got it here. So that's kind of the final considerations, right? And I put a few points here for us to talk about, but I would like to hear from you as well. That says the law of cause and effect is divine, dynamic, and universal. So it's not, we talked about the difference between the law of cause and effect and the mechanical law, right, of physics. It teaches us, it does not punish. The law of progress provides every soul the opportunity to acquire the good that it lacks. Right? The law of progress that is in the Spirit's book, one of the moral laws. And the purpose of incarnation is to lead us to perfection. We evolve through our own merit. Evil is part of our evolutionary state. Pain is the stick that leads us to the right path. We talk about the role of pain, right? And we suffer when we deviate from the divine law. The spirits that follow the right path can, ascend more quickly. Heaven and hell are states of mind. The soul finds its own punishment itself, whatever it may be. We talked about heaven and hell not being a place, physical place, but more a place where we feel. And regret alone is not sufficient. Is a requirement. Is required also to have the atonement and redemption. And we talked about that. This life process is a form of us to really be able to give life back, something that we probably took in another form, And the final step towards redemption is the humility and yielding to the will of God. Our habits and inflexibility increase our suffering and delay our progress. And we talked about those, we talked about our thoughts and we talked about our connections. And it's possible to be happy on earth with good conscience and faith in the future. So I just wanted to bring a few pieces here of the books, right? For us to reflect together, because it's something that we use on an ongoing basis. We talk a lot about these laws. We talked about, cause and effect, and we talked about our pains and our experiences. And this is a few compilations of another way to look into that, right? So I have here in Portuguese. These are the books that we talked about. I think mostly from Kardec. And that's it. We'd love to hear from you. Get your questions, your thoughts.
Why is the mechanical not the universal law. Like, for example, in science, you've got the E equal mc squared is mechanical law, but
Yes.
it's universal.
Mhm.
Oh, it's not universal because in different universe doesn't work.
Oh, that you gave me a physics question. Do I close the streaming now, or?
Oh, you can keep it. Yeah.
But the sound will be bad because.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Do I do this one?